Joanne Wilson, and this is Positively Gotham Gal. Real, honest, and meaningful conversations with women entrepreneurs about their approach to life, business, and everything in between.
So I'm going to read this quote from you, which I think is great, which will continue this conversation. It's 2026, which is not that far away. The United States is reflecting on and reckoning with 250 years of history since its founding. Throughout the year, the nation's first woman president, from your lips to God's ear, presides over solemn ceremonies of reckoning, joyful celebrations of renewal, and competitions to imagine what the next 50 or 250 years will bring. What is a dream we have dared not to yet dream, but you want to see be made real? What will our new narrative be for our country, and who will be included in, quote unquote, we the people?
That's my vision.
By the way, I'm all in, right? I mean, I'm signing up. And how's that going to happen?
Well, it's funny. Many readers of Renewal really like that part. A very close friend of mine said, that she actually believed it for a second. She sort of believed that was actually all happening, and then she realized obviously it couldn't be happening, and it's a vision of 2026. There's some things we can't control, obviously, like who the president is in 2026. I do actually think that things like competitions to imagine what the next 50 or 250 years are, or even how do we best integrate, reflect on, and celebrate the first 250, that's well within our capacity. You could have a competition for the best design for the National Mall for 2026 right now. And if you think about the COVID exhibition where a flag for every COVID victim, or you think about the AIDS quilt, we have had really powerful national experiences done through competitions on the mall. So that kind of thing could happen in every town, in every state capital, and national capital. Similarly, telling stories, like I think about a story corps for 2026, asking people to think through, so what does it mean to you, or what did it mean to your family? How do you think about your family differently now than you did? I mean, I grew up in the South with a long line of Southerners behind me in North Carolina, of whom my grandmother was very proud. They were slaveholders. They fought in the Civil War on the Confederate side. And so what does that mean to me now? So there are lots of ways we could do things that are really personal. There are lots of things we could do things that are national. And I think it's a question of how many people want to be part of shaping a narrative that is not determined by an official commission or by the media or by special interest groups.
No, you bring out a really good point, which is, how do we change that narrative? And particularly that we all have to get involved to want to change that narrative. And I do, the AIDS quilts was one of the most incredible events, and it's so huge and so powering. And how do we do this in different cities across the country with this positive note of people that are involved? And I mean, certainly we're seeing a hell of a lot more women go into politics. So I think that's only a good thing and is only going to get better with time. But let's go back for a second, because, you wrote that famous article in 2012, Why Women Still Can't Have It All, right?
Yep. Almost a decade ago. Yeah.
Oh my God, you're right. God, that's crazy. And it was a major debate over, gender equity. And, I remember when you spoke at the conference, you said something that really stuck with me, which is when you decided, okay, I'm going to return to my passion, which you have done since then. And you're like, my husband's going to sort of be the stay-at-home mother, father figure, parental figure. And you're like, okay, you got to do this, 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 this. And he's like, I'm not doing it how you do it. And to let go of
Exactly.
that,
Exactly.
you know, which is not easy, particularly as a mother. But you have gone back and found your passion, and you're making a difference every day. So just talk a little bit about how you evolved and then ended up as the president and the CEO of New America.
It's funny. I wrote that article is why you and I met, right? I mean, it's
Exactly.
you are one example of what became a new life for me suddenly, of speaking to audiences of really wonderful women on issues that we all had different perspectives on, but we all had some things in common. And it really did change my life profoundly, and it put me on the path of domestic issues where I'd spent my life on foreign policy. And it's a large part of why I left Princeton and came to New America, because I thought I need to be in a space where I can do both, and New America did both. But also, I'm now, whether I wanted to be or not, on the front lines of gender equality debates, and then increasingly care debates, and building an infrastructure of care in a whole area that I had just never thought of beyond being an individual feminist who, supported women and women's careers, but not thinking about what it would take. And, if you talk to my husband and my kids now, they would on the one hand say that certainly Andy and my publishing the details of our lives, and his being a lead parent. Often people come up to him in academic conferences and tell him that reading his article about why he put my career first and reading my article were really important for their marriage. So we hear that a lot. And
That's amazing.
all the time. I mean, people don't, even now, 10 years later, it's rare that I don't go somewhere and some woman comes up to me and says, this was really important. But it's equally true for him, among men and women who say, because you were that candid, I could say to my husband, hey, look, Andrew Moravchik, he's a very big professor in the field. This is what he did. Where are we? So that was very important. My kids would also say, in part, that after I wrote that article, I wasn't less home because I'd been commuting to DC. It was not possible to be less home before, but that took me away in a different way. And we were kind of this idealized couple. And of course, we had our stresses and strains with our kids like everybody else. So occasionally my kids will say, wait till we write the Atlantic article. And Andy and I are like, no. So it was this weird sort of suddenly being my son would say, Mom, you were like a B-list celebrity. He lives in LA, so he's used to movie stars, of which I was certainly not one. But it really put a spotlight on the whole family and made us think a lot about these issues. And my kids certainly have thought a lot about how they will be in their marriages. I mean, neither of them are close to marriage, but I hope they're going to be really good husbands and lead parent fathers.
Well, I have a lot of friends that are younger than me, and they're just starting to have kids. And most of the women still work, or they do. They work for themselves and they're freelance, and their husbands are great. And it is very interesting to see next generations change. Like, okay, fine, I didn't go to the office every day, right? I managed to figure out a career for myself where I was always around and present, making family first. But it wasn't that I wasn't working. I wasn't sitting around like making a cookie, waiting for everyone to show up so I could bake them. And so, but I was there, but I worked too. And I do think with the 3-day work week,
huge.
it changes everything, and it makes work something for some that it's only work. For others, it's 24/7. It's part of who I am, but it also makes your priorities change of friends, family, life. And separates your work from your
Totally
family.
does. And I think for many of us, the pandemic has been a process of, yes, realizing the different dimensions of life and how to rebalance them. Those of us who are privileged enough to be able to work from home, But women like you and me have been saying for longer than a decade, hey, we can work from home.
Yes.
We can get it done. Believe me, we can get it
Yes.
done. And we are super efficient. And many of the men in our lives have been saying, absolutely not. It's presence. It's presence. And even 8 months into the pandemic, I was having these debates with various male friends of mine who run companies, who were all saying, no, everybody's going to come back to work because it's going to be really important to be near the boss. And I'm thinking, you don't know your Gen Zs, because they they're not coming back to work.
And many are working. I mean, all the numbers came out this week. Yes, we have more people who are working, but they're working for themselves.
Exactly.
So it's a very different shift. So let's talk a little bit about all your advocacy work that you've done for New America, and the impact that you've made, and then and a little bit about politics. So what tell us all what New America does.
So New America is a think tank and civic enterprise, or a think and action tank. In other words, it's a place that solves public problems in the way that traditionally in Washington, D.C., think tanks are policy research institutes, right? A group of people who are expert on housing policy or tech policy or education or labor, all these different areas, or foreign policy, research problems, write reports, recommend solutions. So you might say, here's the best way to do paid family leave, and we've looked at multiple states, and this is the way to do it. And then you do what we call public interest advocacy. So we're not a lobby firm, right? But we spend time, some of our programs are on Capitol Hill pushing legislation that in part embeds our ideas, or making comments on something that the government, releases a regulation and it's up for notice and comment. I'll give you an example. We pushed very hard for net neutrality, right? The idea that everybody had to have equal access to the internet, and that you couldn't, if you were a telecoms firm, you couldn't charge some people more than others for access to the same programming. That was an idea that a fellow at New America came up with. One of our big tech programs pushed it, got it through. Then it got reversed in the Trump administration. Now we're pushing it again. So all of that we do, and lots of other think tanks in DC do it. What we've done, and it has been interestingly led by many women at New America, and we're now 70% women, we have really pioneered work on the ground with looking at how benefits, for instance, get implemented. So take my example of paid family leave. In New Jersey, you have paid family leave. Only 40% of women who are eligible for it take it up. 40%. So what happened? It doesn't surprise you. So why?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I'll tell you why, because it's part of the American narrative.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Work. We don't take time off. You take time off, you're going to lose your place in line.
That is part of it. There's no question. But the other parts of it are more mundane, which are the forms are a nightmare to fill out. It's extremely confusing. There's several different kinds of paid leave you can have, and it's hard to figure it out. Employers have zero incentive to publicize it because they don't want you to take paid leave. Exactly. So it's not well understood. And there are a whole bunch of very practical, non-sexy obstacles to why this policy doesn't work. Or the earned income tax credit, which is hugely important for poverty relief. 20% of Americans don't take it. There are literally billions of dollars left on the table. So New America has really pushed what we call human-centered design applied to policy. Right? So human-centered policy making, where we go out and talk to the people who are supposed to benefit from these policies, working often with state or local agencies, and figure out where the pain points are. It's, as you will know, it's how you design software, right? You have a beta and you just keep improving it. But we don't tend to do that when we're solving public problems. We get a law passed, and then it's sort of like, okay, somebody else will implement it. New America wants to be the place that takes ideas to action and back, so that there's this constant feedback loop which is also part of really making democracy deliver for people. And part of what's wrong in the country is there's so little trust of governments or of corporations, but particularly of governments. Like, part of the rejection of benefits and taxes and all of that is people don't believe they're actually going to see the benefits of it. And so we're really working at, how do you make government work? How do you make policies deliver for the people who are supposed to benefit from them?
Well, which is amazing, but it is very, when you bring up, I hate to say this, but whenever I think about new things that are being built for the government, or new products, or new things to be resolved, I always think of, like, it's like a bunch of white men in black suits that are building these softwares that are absolutely
Yep.
horrific. And it should be as easy as your name, your number, your social security. I mean, there should not be all of this paperwork. And sometimes I wonder if it's there just to ensure that the money doesn't get delivered. I don't know the answer to it. But and then I think, well, there's a reason people are frustrated, and there's like a whole thing with
Yep.
cryptocurrencies and the changing of
Yep.
government, changing of large companies that haven't seen all of this stuff that's coming, and they're not listening to the next generation. And even during the Bush administration, one of the things that he did well was spending more money and bringing in more people to be
Yep.
hired, that made it look like he was doing fabulous. And so the government employs all these people. What happens when we don't need them because we have computers? We're going to have a bunch of people without jobs. I mean, so there's it's just so many layers and such frustration with the government, which leads me to my next question. While America looks inward after the Trump administration, where do you think, in this post world, like, will we ever gain credibility again? Will we ever return from that? I mean, there's a reason we got to where we got, right? And, like, just like these people in Michigan, or all these people with their guns and all this anger and, anti-abortion. I mean, we could go on and on and on. It's the minority's voice, because the majority thinks everything's okay.
So when you say, you mean as what the rest of the world sees, or what Americans see when we look at each other?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. I think it's both.
So I'll start with what the rest of the world sees. I mean, we're showing a very bad face to the world in many, many ways, right? A lot of folks abroad are horrified.
So many
I mean,
ways.
January 6th really was, the riot that echoed around the world, not the shot that echoed around the world.
And we still haven't
Yeah.
done anything. It's mind blowing to me.
Yeah. But I will say, my mother's Belgian, and I grew up going back and forth to Brussels in the 60s and then the 70s. And in the 60s, of course, we had riots in our cities. We had the violence at Kent State, the violence at the Chicago Democratic Convention. We had bombings. We had civil rights protests, and many of them were really, really violent. And I remember my Belgian family just being appalled and, talking about the racism of the United States. And at that point, Belgium had no black people or people of color. They had no North Africans. So it was easy for them to point at us and say we were racist. But the larger point is, even though there was Vietnam, there was a lot of really ugly stuff that the world saw. It did not stop us from still playing the major leading role in foreign affairs with the Soviet Union, and then in the 1990s. And I think now, as long as we're really honest about the flaws in our democracy, where we say, look, we are not holding ourselves up as a beacon of light here. We are holding ourselves up as a country that has lots of problems, and we will make those clear, and we'll work with other democracies. I think we still have a leadership role to play in the world. I don't think we're ever going to go back to the 1990s, where the Soviet Union was vanquished and there was no other kind of peer competitor. But I definitely think nobody's pushing us off the world stage anytime soon.
No, I don't either. But I feel that through COVID, and again, it just internally in this country, and yes, others, but looking at us, it almost opened a Pandora's box to the reality of all the issues we have. I mean, even people who live hand to mouth, and there's a lot of that. But once the hand stops feeding, you're homeless, right? So there's all of these issues. And how do you think that we come back as a united country after this severe division and what is happening, in the GOP? Like, I hold the Democrats responsible for a lot of shit too. But that in particular is very, very unattractive.
So I do not see any future in which there's, harmony across the board. That's never been true. We're an incredibly diverse country. And one of the key things is we're becoming more and more diverse. So we really are. That 2026 date, we will be only 15 years away from being a majority minority country, or I prefer to call it a plurality nation where there is no majority. And after 250 years of a white majority, and a huge white majority for most of that time, to move to a plurality nation, and Great Britain should do the same probably in the 2050s, other European countries too. That's a dramatic change. And you're never going to get some folks reconciled. I mean, I don't think you can ask many of the people who are afraid and racist and xenophobic and left behind, all those things. A lot of that is going to finally resolve more generationally than anything else. And if you look at
I totally
the
agree.
younger people feel differently.
Like a relationship generationally and plurality, because I think one of the issues that we have, which is a great thing and a bad thing, is that you can live to be 100 years old.
Yes.
Right. So the generationally happened much quicker.
Exactly.
But now, you have people that are still, out there in 70s and 80s that really don't understand what's happening. And they're still holding major offices.
Yes, they are.
So I think, seriously. And so that's very hard. I mean, when you look at the average, person in the Senate, or even look at the average age of a truck driver, right? No one saw that coming either. And so a lot of these issues, we need to bring ourselves up to essentially the 21st century, right? And it's still taking time.
The other thing that's going to make a difference, though, is that as we are not tied to offices in the same way, you are going to see, and you are already seeing, people moving back to hometowns or closer to their parents, right? So as my generation, your generation, we're boomers, right? As we age, then our kids, we want to be closer to our kids and grandkids. And then we also need our kids and grandkids to take care of us. And so you're seeing that sort of great sort. You're also, of course, seeing lots of people saying, well, wait a minute, if I can work for my company from a town where I can buy a house and the quality of life is higher, I'd rather be there. And if you're New America, you're saying, gee, the talent pool across the country is really terrific, so I'm going to hire that way. That's going to start to shake up the residential, rural, urban, red state, blue state segregation. It'll take a while. This is not, next year. But if you look over a decade, this kind of red America versus blue America and urban America versus rural America, a lot of that has been created by you live and work in the same place. And there have been these cities where everybody clusters. I don't think that's going to be true in the future.
I agree. I think it's going to be very blended. And, if you are better off and much prefer actually living in a much more rural area in a nice house, and you have to come in twice a week to the city, there's high-speed trains that get you in 3 hours. That's fine, because you can afford to live there and you like that life you want to have. And I agree with that. I mean, I remember there was a company that was in Iowa, and their second round of funding was from a company, Silicon Valley venture capitalists. And they're like, well, if we fund it, you have to come to live in San Francisco. And I remember thinking, no, isn't that the point? Like, we give money to someone in Iowa, and then we have all these people that live in Iowa, and change the economies, because we can never go back to Detroit, which was a one-hit wonder as a town, right? That these are going to be much more spread out of what the economies are of all these cities.
Exactly. And they're going to be more patchwork in ways that again will also mean you have more of a chance to actually know your neighbors. I mean, during the pandemic, right, we all took walks. People suddenly sort of rediscovered either neighborhoods in cities, or I mean, I live in in Princeton, New Jersey, all these small towns, right, where because you couldn't go anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, there's been a tremendous also increase in youth engagement in
Yes.
politics. And so, and talk a little bit about, and it's certainly part of Renewal, right? So where is that happening? I mean, I remember when, that awful shooting happened in Florida, and remember thinking, watching these kids rally, and it was the first time I thought, you know what? This is going to
Yeah.
be different.
Yeah. Well, and the kids are very, very empowered, right? They're completely connected. So they're very used to being able to communicate to large numbers of friends, and then friends and friends very quickly, as indeed you saw with the sort of gun control that came out of the gun anti-gun movement that came out of that shooting. But they're also um, they have a sense of possibility that I mean, think about the company, the startups you invest in, right, as an angel investor. So if I want to start a company now, I can have my own controller online. I can have an accountant online. I can find people to do things that would have been really hard if I'd had to either hire all those people myself or assemble them in a city. So this sense of possibility, or my kid, one of my sons is upholstering furniture, and I'm like, Edward, how on earth would you do that? Oh, Mom, I just went on YouTube. Right? He's learned everything on YouTube,
Oh, yes.
from learning how to drum to sew a button to this kind of thing. So I also think that Gen Z and the younger millennials have a sense of capability and possibility. At the same time, they have real anger, both for the climate and for the sense that they can't buy houses, that they don't have health insurance, that a lot of the things we all took for granted coming out of college is no longer true, even for really quite affluent kids or kids from affluent backgrounds. And that combination of a sense of that their world really is heading for catastrophe and a sense of collective power makes for big change.
Yes, yes, and I really do hope it does. And yeah, I think that, listen, even like children are saying, or young adults, I don't want to have children. I mean, if you go back and read every president's speech from the beginning of time, the reality is we've always been in a
Yeah.
crisis. But right now, I feel that the media has heightened it to the point where, we're waiting for
Yeah.
Armageddon.
Yeah. Well, but I
And
also
and
think
that's why your parents stop watching the
that,
news.
but there is, I mean, look, a sense of floods and fires. The climate crisis does create a sense of urgency and doom that I don't remember. I mean, yes, you and I grew up where we thought nuclear winter was a distinct possibility,
Yes,
right? I mean, the
100%.
Soviet Union and the United States blowing both ourselves up and taking the rest of the world with us was very real. And we had, all those drills at school, and so maybe that's the same. But there is this feeling when suddenly, nature cannot be controlled, whether it's flash floods or unbelievable rainstorms, or again, I mean, I live on the East Coast, but my friends on the West Coast, the fires are this sense
My
of
God, that's
doom, literally,
awful.
with the smoke. So I think that does make a big difference for our kids.
Well, you're also involved with opportunity at work, and which is trying to rewire the labor market for the 70 million Americans without a bachelor's degree. Um, but let's talk a little bit about how important is college going to be in the future, and are we going to see it become, when more structured, like carpenter school, or electric school, or art school, or chef school. I mean, I don't know, but I still, at the heart of my core, believe the best education is a liberal arts education. It just helps you expand your mind and think differently. But that's an expensive cost, and it's getting more expensive, and the colleges created that expense by adding buildings after buildings after buildings. And now here we are, and through COVID, when many weren't able to go to school in the classroom, you think to yourself, should I be paying for that school $60,000 a year when it's not even that great of a school to begin with? And I was really there for the social purpose. Like, where am I going with all that debt?
Well, so there's a lot of questions in that, and you have to start by realizing, which I never knew until I started working at New America. Only 14% of Americans go to 4-year residential universities or colleges. 14%. Yeah. So I note what that is. That's 4 years. So huge numbers of Americans go to community colleges and get an associate's degree. And it's 4-year residential. So lots of people go to 4-year colleges, but they work the whole time, right? Those are they're if think about if you're in New York City, look up at the subway and see all the things that are being advertised. A lot of kids are getting a college degree, but they've never been on a residential campus. So that, ivory tower, leafy green campus, beautiful buildings, all that many of us think of and that are true of our top institutions, that's 14% of Americans. So you start with that, and then you think, well, certainly the rest, the non 4-year residential has to change, is changing already. I hope that the notion of liberal arts, of the value of humanities, and taking things because you love them and learning how to expand your mind and learning critical thinking, that I hope that's always part of what we define as a good education. Although you could do that through your local library in classes for the rest of your life, right? And there are lots of ways to be able to do that, and more online, where you want to take a Shakespeare course, you can take the best course with some of the best Shakespeare lecturers in the world online. And as I get older,
Yes.
I may well do that. But so you asked two things. One, yes, I think different credentials are going to get stacked in all sorts of ways. So you're going to get 3 or 4 courses that may, help you, yes, on sort of career and technical education. You want to be a carpenter, you want to be an insurance adjuster, you want to be a physician's assistant. There are many different, it's not just sort of in the trades. There are many different ways you could get those credentials. Or, as you said, opportunity at work works with people we call stars, skilled through alternate routes. So it means you can code, but you didn't learn it in college. You learned it in a boot camp, and then you were an apprentice, and now you're an IT person, and now we can send you for a certificate in a particular kind of IT expertise. Or so that,
Yes.
and there's so many kinds of expertise. If you think about the world of digital graphics, things when we were growing up, the idea of
No,
being
I mean, the amount of jobs that are out there is crazy. Not when we graduated, but it's amazing.
exactly for me, web design meant Charlotte the Spider. These ideas. So I do think education will be much more lifelong. And Kevin Carey, who runs my higher ed program, wrote a book called The End of College 6 years ago. And what he meant was this notion of 4 years that from 18 to 22 is going to be over. It's lifelong. It will be, you might spend a year fully studying here and then a year working and then another year studying, or you might do 6 months. And the great universities in this country and in the world that are really residential will continue, and a very small group of people, really talented people, will still go to them. But for the vast majority of Americans and people elsewhere in the world, education will be something that is part of your life in different ways throughout your life. And for me, that's actually a much more promising prospect, and ultimately a more egalitarian one if we get the prices down.
Well, supply demand, right? So
Yeah. Well, but look, online, you as you point out, you just can't justify charging the same amount, right? You really can't. There's way too much competition, so the prices will come
there's
down.
way too much competition. But, I mean, certainly with the inflation happening now, I'm hoping with the amount of money that the administration is going to put into the economy, that people are going to have jobs, they're actually going to pay taxes, that, it will all wash itself
We
out at one
certainly
point.
hope so.
I mean, that's the point. So just a little bit more on Renewal. What was the impetus behind, sitting down and writing that book? Because writing a book is really
Writing a
hard.
book is hard. This is my 5th book, solo authored. I've also edited some books. And the first one took 10 years. This one took more, took about 14 months. So I'm definitely getting better. I mean, it's a short book. It's only 50,000 words. It was a very hard book to write because it's very personal, right? The opening line is, "It was the worst day of my professional life." And the first part is really a difficult leadership journey for me, but that a journey that turned into a process of renewal, a process of transformation. So big change, but based on really facing my own flaws and patterns of behavior. And that's why I use this idea of renewal. You look backward, the re part, and you look forward at the same time, and looking backward and being really honest about what you do well, but where you've really fallen short is what helps you then change. And I wanted to write that story. I thought a lot of people could learn from it. I partly through the experience of writing my Atlantic article, I knew that I could speak to lots of people who look like me and lots of people who don't, and that would be valuable, I hoped, and that I could tie that to a vision of what could be possible if, as a country, we have the courage to be radically honest about all of our past, all of our history. There's still a lot of really good history, but there's a lot of bad history, and we need to be able to look at them together. And then to come together as a much richer country, that we're a country that reflects the whole world and has many strands of history, which of course has always been true. I mean, if you think about the experience of German Jews in New York versus Russian Jews, right? Or Irish and Italians versus Germans and English. So even among white Americans, there've always been these different stories, and the Pilgrims were just a tiny part of it. But now, if you look at African Americans and Asian Americans and Latinx Americans, all these different people, it's a very rich tapestry, and I see a brilliant future. And I wanted to write a book that would at least open the door to that, while at the same time being, as I say, radically honest about the past. So I've never written anything like it. The style of it, as you can tell, there are no subheadings, there's no policy arguments. It's written a little more like fiction. But it was just something I really wanted to do.
I love it. I mean, the timing is perfect. And I think Renewal, particularly as we're still in a global pandemic. And as I said earlier, this Pandora's box has opened, that we're much more aware of our past, of our a lot of our terrible
Exactly.
past, about what we've done to Black Americans, what we've done to people that have come here from other countries, how we've treated women. I mean, we could go on and on and on and on. And if you can't understand the
Right.
past and come to terms with it, it's very hard to go forward and move on as a nation. And so I really love that one thing that's come out of COVID, which is, Black Lives Matter, and more women running for office, and more people just being honest about our
Exactly.
history and trying to shift this narrative that's been foisted on us, which is not really the real truth.
No.
And so, so your book Renewal, I think, is right on time. And we should all be taking a look at ourselves as Americans, and how can we agree to disagree and move forward? Because there's just no strife is not going
No,
to get us
it
anywhere.
definitely no. We have to have a vision, again, not of harmony and everybody holds hands. That will never be us. But
No, we don't need to
right,
kumbaya
no,
for
but a
sure.
vision of kind of what I think of as positive conflict, right? The kind of
Hmm.
conflict that brings energy and the kind of vitality of debate, and without hatred, right? That you and I differ. I grew up with Republicans and Democrats, and we voted different ways. We didn't think the other party was not part of the moral universe.
Right. I mean, that's the worst part. It's like even when in business, you're buying something, you're taking money from something, whatever it is, those negotiations can be tense. But once you get to the other side, everyone got something
Yep.
at the table.
Yep.
And we need to get there desperately.
Well, but I think we will, only through, as I said, being really honest. And it's hard, but it's not. It's certainly doable. And it's, if you have the courage, and it's the sort of the basics of any kind of therapy. You got to name it to change it. You got to face it. You got to really be honest about why you do what you do, or why you've done certain things. And I actually think we have that strength and courage, and where we're going to have to as a nation. But
yeah, we are. And the access more to help with mental health,
also,
I think, is
very strongly, very strongly. Yeah, I describe a whole care economy there.
Yeah, I mean, that is, everybody should have their own personal therapist as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and increasingly, though, digitally, therapy of many different kinds is going to be far more available, right?
Yes,
And
it
yeah,
should be.
it should be. Yeah.
Yes. How do you, if you know yourself better, you become a
Exactly.
better person.
Exactly. And also, again, when I talk about the care economy, I'm not just talking about child care or elder care. I'm thinking of coaching and guiding and therapy of all kinds, whether it's physical or mental, and navigating, mentoring, teaching. Those are all relationship based sources of value, right? Where you grow and the other person benefits by investing in you, whether you're a parent or a child, right? And so that's going to be a huge source of value going forward, but only if we pay more for it, and we understand socially that to say you're a teacher should be as prestigious as being a banker, which it certainly is not now.
Well, no, it certainly isn't. But I agree with you. I think that is actually the most important issue of today. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's great seeing your face.
It really is.
All right. Well, take care.
Thank you. And this was great fun. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.